There we go. Anyway, right. So yeah, I had a friend in college who, he had this magical ability to short out people's computers. He would walk into a room. You always wanted to make sure that you saved your work, whatever you were working on, before Cliff came over, because your computer was going to crash when he did. So, yeah. So the first thing I really want to do today is kind of think about what we think fantasy and science fiction are, and try to work together towards a coherent definition. So I would like each of you to take a couple minutes and just think about what you think, like how you would define, let's start with fantasy, right? Just take a couple minutes, sketch out some ideas, think about how you would define fantasy. How are we doing here, guys? Do we need another minute, or do we feel like we're pretty good? Everybody feel okay with what you got? Okay, so keep it to yourself for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come around with these index cards, and on each of these cards, right on one side, is the name of a work of literary criticism that attempts to define fantasy. The name of the author, the name of the book, the name of the date, or the book or essay. And on the other side is the definition itself that that author comes up with, right? So what I'm going to do, I've got these fanned out. I'm going to bring them around, pick one. It's okay. Everybody avoided the yellow. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is take and compare the definition that you drew to the one that you came up with, right? Do you have anything in common in your idea of fantasy with this particular critic? Right? Where do they differ from you? What do you think what do you think they mean by their definition, right? Think about those kinds of things. And if you have any questions about what you drew, do feel free to call me over and ask. Even if you just need me to explain my chicken scratch handwriting. One or two of you still writing, take another minute. Unless everybody's done. Okay? So let's start with what you guys think of when you hear the term fantasy? What do you think fantasy is? Or what do you think are the typical features that make something a fantasy?
Magic.
Okay, magic. And that in itself is actually kind of, magic can mean a number of things though, right? So do we think of, like, what do we think of when we think of magic, right? Like, what is magic in this context, what do you think?
Something like wizards and stuff.
Okay, like wizards and spells and things like that, okay.
Weapons.
Okay. Enchanted weapons. All right, weapons that can do things they oughtn't to be able to do, given the normal laws of physics, right? Anything else you guys think of when you think of magic?
Anything that's outside of our norm.
Okay. Okay, outside the human norm. Good. All right, what else do you guys think of when you think of fantasy, right? How else would you, what other features would you say a fantasy typically has? Yeah.
I think of like magical creatures or creatures that aren't from our world, but also in like another fantasy world.
Okay.
Like not on our earth, I guess.
Okay, so strange, non-natural creatures, right? Or at least not natural to our world. Good, what else?
There's a great evil that needs to be defeated.
Okay. Often a good versus evil kind of plot. What else?
The hero has to go through this experience and has to have this, like, yeah, there's a quest and they have to
Okay.
do this quest.
The whole hero's journey model, right? This is something that we will definitely talk about.
I said like fake realities or like a fake setting that can be done.
Okay. Or at least, yeah, kind of like alternative realities,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. What else?
There's always a divide, I think. Like, you can't have reality in your fantasy, because once you have the fantasy, it becomes your reality. So there's always, like, you're not going to be able to get it. Does that make sense?
Okay. That it can't be.
Obtained.
Okay. So you're saying that like that realism and fantasy don't mix.
Yeah. Like, because once, like, you obtain it, if you're in realism, it's not fantasy anymore.
Okay. Now, there is a subspecies of literature called magic realism, right, in which magical things happen in the normal world, like writers like Salman Rushdie and Milan Kundera work in that particular genre, Isabel Allende. But the key term there is magic realism, right? They don't call it fantasy. Okay, yeah, so yeah, we can say unmixed with realism. All right, interesting. Anything else? Okay, so if you guys don't have anything else to add right now, why don't we try to get to what your critics are saying and see if we can then work our way around to a general definition. So who wants to go first? Okay, Dalen, who did you get?
Eric Pumpkin.
Radkin.
I thought it was a big. Okay, I see it now. I see the word.
Yep, Eric Radkin, yeah. Okay.
Basically, I kind of summed up that that really the definition is just, it's that fantasy is like against everything that we genuinely believe.
Okay.
And then what we previously know could mess the whole story up. That's kind of how I said it. So just everything that's not what we normally think, which is kind of what we said.
Okay, so that fantasy is something that kind of runs counter to our ordinary lived experience or everyday reality, right? But in a fantasy world, right, this is how everyday reality works, right? So yeah, we are talking. I think it was Grace said that, alternative reality, right? That the rules in a fantasy world are typically different, right? From the rules in our world. All right, good. Who wants to go next? Yeah, Grace.
I had Svetlana Todorov,
Okay.
and I said, he was just basically saying that, like, when someone from, like, our everyday reality would, like, experience some kind of supernatural event, and then that would become, like, their life, sort of.
Okay. So right, the intrusion of the supernatural onto
Yeah.
reality. Okay. Right, the encounter with that which we cannot explain or accommodate to our everyday experience. Okay, good. Who wants to go next? Ashlyn.
I had C.N.
C.N. Manlove, yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
but-
Manlove is a guy who wrote, he cared enough about fantasy to write 2 books about it, but doesn't actually seem to like it very much. Go ahead.
His definition, I summarized that it's a type of fiction that should invoke wonder with an element of the supernatural in which the reader becomes more familiar with the characters.
Okay, so we're seeing a couple of trends here, right? What sorts of things are we seeing repeating in these definitions so far?
Supernatural.
Yeah, supernatural is everywhere, right? Anything else that we're seeing kind of repeating yet in these definitions? I think one of the things that's most interesting about Manlove's definition is that he's focusing on the way the reader's supposed to respond to it, right? Like, you don't respond with recognition. You don't respond with an, oh yes, this is how things are, right? The intended response is wonder, right? Surprise. This is not how my everyday reality is supposed to be. All right, who wants to go next? Yeah, Harrington, go ahead.
I had J.R.R. Tolkien,
Okay.
and I said basic, my summary was like basically, fantasy is when a writer successfully creates a secondary world with its own laws and rules,
Mhm.
that while you're reading, you believe those, and as soon as that's broken and you stop believing, then it's broken, like the spell is broken and you're brought back to reality.
Yes, keep this term in mind here, right? Secondary world. We're going to be coming back to this a lot, right? Okay, so what Tolkien is arguing for then, right, is a kind of alternative reality, right, that operates by its own consistent and believable rules, right? That it's not enough for it to be different from everyday reality, right? It also has to be believable while you're experiencing it, right? This is the importance of consistency, right? Making sure that it operates by a consistent set of rules. Okay, so who hasn't spoken up yet? Okay, Bethany.
I got El Sprague to come.
Okay, yep.
I basically, I summarized it. He basically said that fantasy uses characters, entities that essentially don't really exist or have never been seen with the naked eye,
Okay.
such as demons, ghosts, witches, and workable magical spells.
Okay, so yeah, he's focusing on the kinds of things that happen and the kinds of characters that it involves, right? That it involves things that, that fantasy it basically involves things that aren't real and never were, right? Now, DeCamp was not so much a critic as a novelist and an editor, who wrote a lot of what is called sword and sorcery fantasy, which is mostly like sandal-wearing dudes in loincloths, wielding giant broadswords, rescuing scantily clad maidens from monsters, right? That was kind of his specialty. Okay, who else has not gone yet? Yeah, Kathy.
So I have Diana Wagner,
Okay.
and what I got from it is that there's different worlds or realities where what's uncommon to us becomes common to them, and that basically life to us is exactly like life to them, but they just live in those different worlds.
Okay, so yeah, their everyday reality seems strange to us, but to the characters that live in this secondary world, this is just mundane, right? This is how things are. Okay, good. So are we seeing, so we already said supernaturalism is a trend, right? Are we seeing other trends developing in these definitions yet?
I mean, there's this trend of alternate, different realities on top of one another.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of, demons and monsters and things that go bump in the night.
Yeah. And how do these alternate how do all these critics seem to agree that these alternate realities are supposed to work, or how are we supposed to perceive them?
I mean,
Let's take a minute and think on that. And I think, Nick, you haven't gone yet, right? So why don't you...
Mine feels very contemporary. It was 1997 by Richard Matthews.
Yeah, most of these are from the 70s. Yeah, there was a big boom in fantasy criticism in the 70s, which then dried up for about 30 years. So, yes.
Fantasy as a distinct literary genre may be best thought of as a fiction that elicits wonder through elements of supernatural or impossible. It consciously breaks the free-form mundane reality.
Okay. So it's talking less about creating a reality, more about breaking our reality, right? All right, good.
going against social norms.
What's that?
Going against social norms.
Okay. Or at least going against what our social norms are, right? But in these secondary worlds, creating social norms as we go, we just kind of look across these, right? Creating social norms that make sense for that world and that everybody just seems to follow, right? I remember I had a friend who was trying to write a fantasy novel, probably 15, 16 years ago. And he introduced a kind of social norm that one group of characters did. They were priests of a certain god, and whenever they, whenever they met one another, as their kind of gesture of recognition and faith, they would tap their foreheads. And so he was noting that they did this every time these characters appeared, right? And on the one hand, that is kind of like good, consistent world building, right? Okay, this is a convincing human practice, right, that this particular group engages in. But you also don't have to tell your reader every time they do it, right? Once you've established that you only need to tell them if for whatever reason they don't do it after that first introduction, right? The idea is to create a convincing and consistent and coherent secondary world that operates by its own set of rules. And that's much of what we're going to be looking at, right? Much of the fantasy that we're going to be looking at. We're going to probably be focusing more on fantasy than on science fiction, in part because that's just what I know a little bit better. We will be looking at some sci-fi. We'll be reading Frankenstein. We will be reading Octavia Butler towards the end of the semester. We will be reading, what the hell else are we reading? I made this syllabus, I should know what's on it. That Hideous Strength is kind of halfway between science fiction and fantasy. But there are other things that we might want to take into account here as well. Like when we think about fantasy, like what tends to be the relationship of a fantasy world to our present? Do we tend to think of fantasy as being set in worlds that are technologically and socially similar to ours? Or do we tend to place them in kind of like different times? Yeah, often we kind of think of it as like past times, right? So like a lot of fantasy, especially a lot of bad fantasy, has a kind of pseudo-medieval feel to it, right? It's a kind of like imagined Middle Ages. But yeah, we do find a lot of authors from early on, this is something that Homer even does in the Odyssey, using fantasy as a way to kind of create a kind of imaginary past. Right, so Homer is going to be writing, kind of like the birth of classical Greece, right? But the people that he's writing about are not his own contemporaries. He's writing about heroes from a past civilization called the Mycenaeans, but in a highly imaginative sort of way that doesn't mimic Mycenaean reality, right? So the reason I want to talk so much about this world building kind of stuff is because this is a big part of what we're going to be doing in the course, right? We're going to be working on, and did I send this assignment around already? You already grabbed one.
Yeah, I got it.
We're going to be working on collaboratively putting together a secondary world. You already have one. And kind of taking turns building parts of it, right? And filling in parts that other people have created. So each of you is first going to be responsible for creating one geographical region. So I will bring in, so like on your own time at home, kind of make a map of your region. I'll bring in a piece of blank poster board, which we'll put up there with sticky tack. And then you will go and draw your region of the map up on the board, right? And show how it connects to everybody else's and whatnot. I think Ashlyn, you're first, so you won't have anything to connect it to, but you get to set the tone.
Yeah, what's it gonna curse?
Yeah.
Is it bad that like when I saw this assignment, I didn't even see like who was assigned what, but I saw that we had to come up with our like own like population, and I instantly started going through it like, this is my people, this is what they are.
No, that's good. That's good. However, remember that you're going to be populating someone else's region.
I know.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a minute, right? So the ultimate goal is to create a secondary world and people it, and then at the end of the semester, after the final, when there's no more stress or pressure or anything, what we'll do is run like a short Dungeons and Dragons adventure in that. Yes?
What is Dungeons and Dragons?
Yep, it is a fantasy role-playing game. You create a character, and you operate that character in the world. So I would essentially control every character who is not a player, and all of the monsters and obstacles and things like that. But y'all would control you would each control an individual character who has particular special abilities and particular capabilities, right?
There's also dice.
Yeah. Most everything is resolved through rolling a 20-sided die. Okay, so the due dates are on here. Everybody's got their... I did this mostly just kind of in alphabetical order. So Ashlyn goes first and Kathy goes last. And then when we get to populating the regions, we go backwards, right? So Kathy, you'll be the last to create a region, but the first to populate one. And Ashlyn, you will be the last to populate one. So on the second page here, I've got all of the stuff that I expect you to do when you're creating your region. So first, I want you to focus on those kinds of physical features of the landscape, right? Are there mountains? Are there bodies of water? Rivers, streams, things like that? Are there, plains, cave? Like, is this a place with like a mountainous region, or is it, wide plains, things like that, right? And I want you to try to come up with at least one special, unique feature for your region, right? Maybe, is there like an ancient ruined city or temple there? Are there underground catacombs? Is there a magical spring, right? Something like that. And when you create your region, I want you to think about how it connects to what the previous persons have done, right? So try to make it make some sort of geographical sense. Now, same thing when we're creating societies, right? I have a list of things here that you should think about when creating a society, right? What do the people there look like? What sorts of things do they wear? What's their relative tech level? Family structures. Do they have a political system? What are their moral values like? What is their religion if they have one? Where are their major settlements? How do they get along with their neighbors, right? What's their primary economic activity? And try to connect all of this to the region that they live in, right? To the geographical features of the region. Like, for example, I've got a couple down here, right? If you've got a culture, does it make any sense to have a culture that strongly values horses and horsemanship living in the mountains? No, you can't ride horses in the mountains, right? Although, such a culture might, say, like breed very sturdy donkeys, right? Or riding goats or something like that, yeah? If you want a culture that are, great horsemen, right? You want them, living on plains or steppes or something like that, right? I've also got an example here. It's like, if, the people's style of dress is mostly like, say, loincloths, right? But they live in a subarctic region. Okay, you can have that happen, right? But why are they able to do that? There has to be some kind of reason for it. Are they covered with fur, right? Are we talking like polar bear people with a sense of modesty, right? Does anybody have any questions about this? Yeah, Nick.
So when we go to create these populations, should we create like a mythos or a history or anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, give me as much detail as you can. Yeah, Bethany.
Will there be check-ins so we can know what our region will be surrounded with?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So every time somebody has their region or their society due, you'll give a little short spiel on it, and you'll draw it on the map here, right, in class. So everybody will know what's gone before, and it'll all go up in Georgia View too. So all of that information will be always publicly available. Any other questions about this? Yeah, Grace.
For the regions, when you're creating those, are we leaving like the kind of like animal life and like any living kind of life for the person who gets to create the society, the people that go in? Because are we like calculating other people's regions?
That's a really good question. I would say consider animal life and kind of like non-human or human, like non-sentient life part of the region.
Okay.
Rather than part of the society.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kathy.
So when we create it, do we have to create it to where like all the societies like get along with each other, or can we like have rivals and everything?
Oh no. In fact, like societies that share a close border and maybe have very different values or compete for resources probably don't like each other, right? So yeah, you can absolutely say that, yeah, my people hate Nick's people, right? Or that's or something like that. Yeah, or, we've been at war for millennia or something like that. Yeah, Ashley.
Mine, the due date's next Thursday. Is it supposed to be that, or should
Yes, because we've got like initial. So it's I have to fix it on the syllabus.
Okay.
The problem was like when I assigned the initial due dates. There were only 5 people enrolled in the class. There are now 7. So I had to fit more people in. So I had to kind of expand. Yeah, unfortunately that tightened things up a little bit for you, but I think you can handle this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Kathy?
So how is the formatting for us to like work in? Because like I was thinking like draw our thing right on paper and then like writing like a little description of it.
Uh-huh.
And then also like bullet points. Or do you want us to actually write like a whole like storyline with it to put it together?
I would say like for this, because we're kind of just sketching it out, bullet points are probably fine. If you would rather write it out in more narrative form, that's okay too, but I'm not going to penalize you for that.
Excited.
The basic idea here is just to try to build a world together, make it consistent, make it coherent, and then the Dungeons and Dragons portion is mostly to try to tell a kind of collaborative story within that world, right? Any other questions? Okay, so we haven't actually really talked about anything that's on the syllabus yet, in part because I frankly just kind of wanted to do things that were more fun. So let's just go over some of the stuff that's on here quickly, like the things that we need to talk about. Okay, so big things to note, my office hours this semester, right? Mondays and Wednesdays are my big teaching days. I have 3 classes on Mondays and Wednesdays, so I'm not in the office much, right? I'm only in the office 11 to 12 on Mondays and Wednesdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, though, I only have 1 class to teach. So I'm in the office pretty much all day, right? From 10 to 12 and then again from 2 to 4. So if you want to talk about anything that you're working on, if you want, say, like help with your world building project, or if you want to talk about one of the papers or something like that, right, please do come and see me, right? If you need to meet with me but can't during any of the scheduled office hours, that's also cool, right? These are just the times that I have to be in the office. I can be in the office at other times as well. So just shoot me an email and we can arrange something. Yeah, kind of.
Do you also do like virtual office hours? Like if we need to meet like Friday, through the week, would you be on Zoom?
Not officially, but I certainly can. Yeah, yes, I certainly can meet with you virtually. And I mean, even if you want to meet with me during my regular office hours, but you'd rather meet virtually, that's fine too, right? Perfectly happy to set that up. The other thing to note is that the best way for you to get in touch with me is my campus email address, which is listed on the first page of the syllabus, right? I do not respond to the Georgia View emails, so do not send them to me, right? They'll just get lost in a black hole. I would also like, one more thing about that, right? In general, I will respond to you within 24 hours, unless it's a weekend, in which case I might be a little bit slower, because
It's a weekend.
yeah, it's the weekend, exactly, yeah. Right? Everybody deserves a weekend, right? Okay, so no one should have any trouble finding the textbooks for this. They're all pretty commonly available, and I checked everything is in the bookstore. Although I noticed the way they have things arranged is weird now.
They're in alphabetical order of the author instead of by subject.
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
It's the new company.
Yeah, I remember, when I was in your position, it was always arranged by course.
So you're looking
Yeah.
walking around and you have to know
Yeah.
the author's last name, which most people don't know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, like, it's not just that the bookstore's out of it, the publishers are out of it.
Yeah, people aren't stocking
Because,
as many
like,
physical.
I
Yeah.
think 2 of your books on here,
Uh-huh.
they're back ordered, and then one of Dr. Callis' books is back ordered.
Okay, which one, do you remember which ones are back ordered?
I think it's the Tempest, and I'm not sure which one. I know I think they're further down in the semester.
Okay.
When I walked by
Yeah.
there, they didn't have C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength,
Mhm.
or,
I think it's that one too, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, you should actually, so The Tempest or That Hideous Strength should also both be easily available from a public library too, if that is the route you need to go.
And the books are pretty decently, they're way cheaper than the bookstore on Amazon, and they can be here by Friday.
Mhm. Yeah, Yeah, I have strong opinions about the corporate takeover of our bookstore. And, for one thing, the fact that there is very little space in the store that is still devoted to books, I find slightly problematic. But you know, hey, you know that's. But yeah. Anyway, moving right along here. So, in terms of how you're going to be graded and what things we're going to be doing on the day-to-day, right? There are going to be 2 exams and 2 papers. So those of you who have taken a class with me before, by and large, know what my exams look like. You took comp with me, so you don't. But so what I do is for the midterm, I give you 2 essay questions to choose from. You pick one. You write a 500 to 750 word exam response. And then I will give you a set of 12 identification terms that I will want you to define. The final is the same format, but a little bit bigger. Right? So I'll give you 12 terms, you'll define 8, right? The final is like that, but a little bit bigger. Right? I'll give you 3 essay questions to choose from. You'll choose 2 this time. Still be writing roughly a 500-word essay about them. And you will have 15 vocabulary terms to choose from. You'll pick 10. Now, as far as those vocabulary terms, now you'll see I have vocabulary quizzes near the bottom of the elements of the grade list here, right? So roughly every week or so, I'm going to give you on Georgia View a list of, it'll go up on Friday. You'll have till Sunday to complete it. I'll give you a list of terms from the course. Now, these might be critical terms, theory terms, things like secondary world, for example. They might be characters or locations that are important to one of the texts that we've read. Nick and Ashley, you guys have done this, right? Yeah, so you know the drill. And you'll give me the text to which the term is most relevant, the name of that text's author, and then a brief definition, right? And what this will do, this will build up a bank of vocabulary words that you can then use to study for the exams. Yes, Grace?
Will that be from memory from that week's class?
No, it'll be open book. You can look it up. Yeah. The basic idea is to reinforce the terms. Yeah, Nick?
Okay, so our midterm and final also have IDs still?
They will have IDs, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, the midterm paper is going to be a close reading of one text from the first half of the semester, right? So anything that we read before, anything we read up to Frankenstein can be used for the midterm paper. And this will consist of a proposal, right? You will write a 500-word proposal explaining what you want to argue in your paper. And then the paper itself. The final paper will be a research paper on a single text from any point in the course, just not on the same thing you wrote your midterm paper about, right? So you'll have to write it about something else. You'll have to use 5 secondary sources, and that'll be done in 3 stages, right? You'll do an annotated bibliography, right, where you go and you get your sources and look at your sources and evaluate them first. Then you come up with a proposal. Then you give me the paper, right? So the first paper will be roughly 1,000 to 1,500 words, so about 4 to 6 pages. The final paper will be 2,000 to 3,000 words. That usually ends up being about 7 to 9 pages. Okay, let's see. Anything else that we need to explain in terms of that? No, I think, yeah, go ahead.
So the midterm exam and the final exam where we have the 12 terms and the questions, are those in class or on Georgia View?
Those will be in class,
Okay.
yes. In part because this is a small enough class, we can still do that safely. And also, it's been my general experience that students do better on the exam when they take it here, in the same room, surrounded by all the familiar stuff, right, where you learned the material, than if you take it at home in a different context, right? I've also noticed that if I give students an open book exam, students tend to do worse because they spend too much time fiddling with the books and not enough time just trying to answer the question. Okay, there will be reading quizzes more or less weekly. I'll give you 12 of them. And what these are going to be different from reading quizzes that I've done in the past. Instead of asking you a bunch of questions about specific details in the reading, what I'm going to do is ask you a kind of open-ended question about the reading that will then, you'll then write about, like I said, do it like about a 12-minute free write-off, trying to respond to that question. And that'll probably give you actually a little bit better practice for the exam questions. Okay, so any questions about the assignments? Okay, let's see, classroom policies that we need to go over. Okay, so I do have an attendance policy. You're permitted 3 unexcused absences. You'll lose 2 points for your final average for each absence beyond the third. For an upper division class, I think the more important thing here is my general annoyance regarding lateness, right? I am always going to start at exactly 12:30, whether you are here or not, and I'm not going to backtrack, right? So I need everybody to be here on time. It's just like, I think I'm a relatively easygoing human being about most things, but I get really pissed off when people wander in late. Like that's just like my personal little bugbear, right? So just please do your best to be on time. I also do give extra credit to students who go to the writing center for assignments. So you take your paper to the writing center, they send me an email, they say, Kathy was at the writing center, we talked about blah, 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 and I give you half a letter grades extra credit on the paper, right? You only get the extra credit once for each assignment, but it might be worth going back multiple times to improve the paper, right? Okay, we all know the technology policy. Is there anything else that we really need to talk about? What questions do you guys have for me about anything at all? That is in any way relevant to the course. Yeah, Grace.
All of the required texts, those are all like individual, their own book, right?
Yeah.
It's not like with all of them in it. Okay.
Nope. And if any of you end up having trouble finding any of the texts, right, come talk to me and I'll see what I can do for you, right? I'll see if I can arrange something. Like most of these are not that hard to get and not very expensive individually, though I get that like this many books can kind of add up. Yeah, I will certainly do my best to help you find anything that you need. In fact, anybody who's having trouble finding a copy of The Tempest, I think I have an old copy in my office that I might be able to loan out. Any other questions? Yeah, Kathy.
So I noticed that there are different types of translations, of course, and different
Yes.
authors. If we accidentally get one by a different person, how big of an impact would it have on us?
It depends on the text. I think with the Odyssey, or even with Chrétien de Troyes, I think those are. It's really only the first 3 texts where it's an issue. With Homer or with Chrétien, probably not a huge deal. Especially since with Homer, we're going to be looking, you're going to be just reading like just a couple of books of the Odyssey, right? So even if the page numbers are different, you'll still know, okay, I have to read book 9 and book 10, right? It's going to be a problem with the Arabian Nights, in part because of the manuscript history of that particular work. which is really weird and complicated. And we'll talk about it in more detail when we actually talk about the text. But there isn't a single authoritative text of the Arabian Nights. And I went with the Hadawi text because it's generally relatively available, it's highly readable, and it's taken from the earliest known manuscript. So if you cannot get the Hadawi text, any of you who took World Lit 1 actually probably have the Hadawi translation in that book, or parts of it. Yeah, just let me know if you can't get your hands on something, and we'll try to accommodate you. Any other questions? Okay, well, we're at 1:30. That's really, I think, all we need to go over today. If you do have questions about something, please do feel free to email me or come see me in the office. And remember that for next time, we are reading books 9 and 10 of the Odyssey, right? So we're only going to be focused on kind of the middle of the epic in which Odysseus is visiting these various strange islands, right? That's the most important part of the poem for our purposes. All right, you are free to go. Please make sure that you leave your information sheets with me. And yeah, if you want to keep the cards with the fantasy definition on it, go for it. If you don't, I'll take them back. But that is up to you. Oh, and I have a bibliography for you as well, which includes all of these authors plus several others, many of whom we will end up discussing.
And I'll tell you, Butler's gotten popular again.
You already grabbed them. Yeah, and I will give you one of these for each class session. And what these are the sources that I consulted to prepare. And they'll give you a starting point when you have to write your final research paper, right?